Whenever you're ready.
Hi, my name is Joel Becerra, and my topic is the death penalty. My main claim is that the death penalty has negative social and economic effects. Capital punishment is a legal penalty in the U.S. and it's currently used by 31 states. My first claim is going to be that the death penalty is costly. Second is that the death penalty can kill an innocent person. And the third is that death penalty fails to deter crime. So the cost of lethal drugs is high. Last year, according to the Washington Times, the state of Virginia, in order to obtain lethal injection drugs, the drug price increased from $535 per execution to $16,500. Pharmaceutical companies worldwide have stopped participating in the death penalty, and the drugs that are used in the death penalty must be tested every month until the expiration date. And something interesting that I just saw, the state of Arkansas is rushing to execute 7 people by the end of April because their supply of midazolam is going to expire at the end, and the manufacturer doesn't want to sell it to them anymore. So overall, it's pretty expensive and it's pretty hard to get these drugs. The cost of court proceedings is high. The capital punishment, the trials, they need specialized lawyers. The trials are longer, and according to Paula Mitchell, professor at Loyola Law School, the entire death penalty system since 1978 has cost around $5 billion. And then according to a Department of Justice report, the average time between sentencing and execution is 15.5 years. My second claim is that the death penalty can kill innocent people. There is strong evidence that a number of innocent people have been executed. For example, the case of Troy Davis, who in 2015 was executed. This started kind of an outrage worldwide because there was strong evidence that he was innocent. Some of the witnesses against him later changed their testimony, and the Pope did a claim for clemency for him, along with former FBI director and a Georgia Supreme Court of Justice Chief Norman Fletcher. And then there's times where mentally unstable people have been executed. For example, Cecil Clayton was executed in 2015. He was 74 years old, he suffered from dementia, and he had an IQ of 71. He lost a portion of his frontal lobe in an accident, about 20%, and the frontal lobe is where you make problem solving and social behavior. That's where the skills are. And that was according to the New York Times. And then another thing is that race plays a factor into who gets executed. Approximately 41% of death row inmates are African American, and 34% of those actually executed are African American as well. And then my last claim is that the death penalty fails to deter crime. There is insufficient evidence that it deters crime, according to the NCAAP. Most people on death row committed their crimes out of emotion. They were under the influence of alcohol or drugs, or they were suffering from some type of mental instability. And so this is people that aren't, when they commit the crimes, they're not really focused on the consequences of the death penalty. It's not going to deter them because at the moment they're not thinking about that, or they're unable to make a rational decision based on that. And then lastly, the states without the death penalty actually have lower murder rates than the states that do have the death penalty still. And that is according to the Death Penalty Information Center. And then just to conclude, the death penalty has negative social and economic effects. It is costly. The lethal drugs that are used are pricey and rare. The cost of court proceedings is very high. There's strong evidence that innocent people have been executed, and there are innocent people on death row. And race plays a factor into the people that get executed. And lastly, that the death penalty fails to deter crime. And that is it.
Did I get that from you now or later?
Later. I'm not giving you anything right now except oral feedback. So. All right, Joel, the proposition's clearly identified, although it's got two parts to it, and that's a little bit problematic. You want a single claim there. The secondary points are labeled nicely, so I know generally where you're going, and when you presented them originally, they are phrased as claims. In the body of the speech, I think you tend not to repeat the claims, but just remind us of what the point was on those things, and sometimes you don't even do that. You just kind of start talking about the issue. But I thought like I said, on a couple of the points there was a signpost. The others I could tell what you were talking about because of the information that you're presenting. The cost issue, I'm not exactly sure that the cost of the drugs is really the big issue. I mean, I wouldn't want to pay $16,000 for the drug, but I'm not exactly sure that that's the thing that is the key component in the cost of the death penalty. That means that if they carried out those 7 executions in Arkansas that you're talking about here, that's probably less than $200,000 that they're spending on that, and that doesn't seem to me like that's a big part of the state of Arkansas's budget, so I'm not sure that we would be worried about that. I think the better argument is the one about the cost of the trials and appeals and all those sorts of things, and that needs to be elaborated on a little bit more. The estimate about having it cost $5 billion since 1978, well, that's almost 40 years ago, so $5 billion over 40 years, that's, puts it at a relatively small amount. What's the alternative? We don't get any comparative data on that. I think that's a little bit problematic. Then there's a random piece of information about how long it takes to execute somebody. I suppose that there's a reason that that's there in the argument, but I'm not sure what it was. There are a couple of places where there was source citation. There were a couple of places where the sources were not cited. You want to be more consistent on that. I thought you got a little bit better on that in the second half of the speech. You've got an example on the second point about innocent people being executed, and well, some of it is talking about people being innocent. Some of it is actually talking about folks who are guilty, but they have mental illnesses. You do have one example of somebody that you believe is innocent who may also have been mentally ill. The proof on that, I think, that could actually be a claim of fact in and of itself. It seems like that there's a presupposition here that this is true, simply because the Pope tried to intervene on that. I like the list of people that you presented suggesting that there is a problem with that conviction. That really sounds to me like it's a potential claim of fact in and of itself, but it doesn't really get very well developed, and as a consequence, I think that it's maybe the least useful evidence that you have in your argument, because I think there's better information on the point that you've got there. The third point on failing to deter, I thought you did a little bit better job on that. There was some good general explanation about how deterrence is supposed to work and why it wouldn't work in this particular case. The state-by-state comparison, you need the statistical information on that, but you have the right idea there. I like the summary at the end of the speech. So structurally, it's pretty solid. Proposition needs to be singular instead of having multiple parts to it. You want more consistency on citing the evidence, especially at the beginning part of the presentation. You did have some good evidence, but I think you could use some more in a couple of places. All right, thank you.